Welcome to another episode of Overcome by My Testimony. I'm a survivor. I'm Shaqwan Vanderhorst, your host, and it is June. June is Infertility Awareness Month, and I am going to be speaking with another one of my Howard sisters about her journey in that realm of living. I just want to start off with giving some statistics. And these are recent, they are from 2024. Globally, according to the World Health Organization, about 1 in 6 people worldwide experience infertility. In the US, according to the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, about 11% of women and 9% of men of childbearing age in the US are infertile. In the realm of couples, according to co-fertility, 19% of couples are unable to conceive after a year of unprotected sex, and 10% are unable to conceive after 2 years. According to age, according to usnews.com, the percentage of married American women under the age of 50 who are infertile increased from 6.7% between 2011 and 2015 to 8.7% between 2015 and 2019. In the realm of mental health, according to Fertility Family, about 34% of people experience infertility seek professional mental health help while trying to conceive. And like I said, I'm going to be speaking with my Howard sister, Shaqwan, on her journey of living with infertility, or what infertility means to her in her life. So Shaqwan, I thank you for joining me today. I thank you for agreeing to do this. How did you come about finding out that you were infertile? What is your infertility journey?
Okay. Hey, Rashawn, thank you. Again, I think in having this conversation, one of the things that I would want viewers to know, or one of the things to clarify is, right, I don't share, or I'm not telling this story from a victim standpoint or mindset, but just to raise awareness and to also talk about something that I don't believe is talked about enough in communities and societies, and with folks that look like us. That's one, right? And when we talk about fertility, we have to acknowledge that fertility is a very general term, or I should say infertility, right? Because the focus is really on infertility, right? And so infertility can mean a number of things depending on the person, depending on other factors like age, what's the actual condition, other hereditary things that may come into play. And then also, your partner, right? Because sometimes it could be, if it's the woman that has an issue, then that's one step. It could be the man that has the issue, right? Or it could be both. So I think it's important to understand that when we talk about infertility, we understand that it's a big and large general term. It impacts those that are impacted by this disease in different ways, right? Because infertility just speaks to the ability, right, to be able to conceive, right? So you may have women that infertility is permanent, in that there is nothing that they can do, no matter what they try, how many times they try it. They just will not be able to conceive when they're the primary source of the issue, right? If you're in a relationship, most times when you share this with your health professional that you are looking to conceive, or you and your partner may be in planning stages, this is unfortunately the only time where medical professionals are even looking to see if there is something that exists that could inhibit you and your partner's ability to bring a child into this world. For me, I guess I never kind of thought, and not from an arrogant standpoint, but I never thought that this will be my reality. And the only reason why I'm saying that is because most times, as women, you know, you have a period, you have, all your women reproductive organs and systems, you just have this idea that your body will one day do what it's intended to do, right? And that's not wrong to operate like that. And again, this is only if this is your desire, because there may be people who may not desire to have biological children, or who don't ever want to have children. So infertility becomes a very sensitive topic for someone that desires to conceive or have children or increase their family through the biological process of having someone that belongs half to you and your partner. So those are the realms that we're speaking about, the context that we're speaking about, like this disease on tonight, right? And so for me, it was just that, hey, I thought I was in control because I want to quote unquote do the traditional route of I'm a child, not worry about kids till I get older. And it wasn't until I was diagnosed with PCOS, which is polycystic ovarian syndrome, which is a condition in which your body, your uterus, produce a lot of cysts, and so it kind of makes it impossible to create a space for implementation to take place, which is a part of the conception process. And ultimately, an embryo is formed and the baby then grows, right? So for me, for a long time, I just thought I was in control because I had this idea that I am going to go to school, um, grow up, get a job, become financially stable. And when I'm ready to have kids, that's when I'll focus on it. But going throughout this journey, I realized that technically the condition that I was diagnosed with almost 3 years ago, it's actually is something that I had since the onset of my menstruation. But again, as a child, when your period comes at 12 or 13, you never think to say to your parent, or you don't go to a GYN at that point to say, hey, am I all right down there, doctor? Would I be able to have kids, in the future, or things of that nature? That's not normal questions you would ask, right? So for me, although in retrospect, I do wish I had asked these questions sooner, um, even if I wasn't planning on having kids at that point in my life. But just I think what can help women who this ultimately may impact, and I wish this on no one, and I wish this no one's journey. But one of the things that they don't teach you is that when it comes to your health, you have to know, and health don't only mean, hey, being diagnosed with a terminal or chronic disease, right? It's anything that impacts your health or impacts your quality of life in whatever way that is meaningful to you, right? So it's never a stupid question. It's never you should always ask questions just so you always have the total picture about your life, especially as women, if we do desire one day to have kids, um, because that was my reality in my journey. Like I said, because I operated up the assumption that my body would just perform the right way. When it came time, I'm one of six. Um, all of my other five siblings have children. I was the only one, again, operating under that I'm in control, that because I haven't intentionally set out to have kids, even though I did acts that could get me pregnant at times, I just thought I was lucky or that I just didn't get pregnant, not knowing that behind the scenes that there was something that impacted ultimately of that even happening. And so for me, it was that in my, last most recent relationship, um, me and my partner having a conversation about, hey, I want kids, you want kids, based on our age, we're getting older, we want to do this. And so in having unprotected sex for over a year, and realizing that I didn't conceive. I just, at my next checkup, basically shared with my doctor, hey, not trying to speak things into my life as we sometimes over spiritual people would say, but just being aware, right? I asked, like, hey, doc, I just wanted to know, am I okay from a perspective? Is everything working properly for me to conceive? And I had shared with her what I just shared with you all. And what she said was, well, let's talk about it more. And that's when she began to ask me my history. And she said, based on some of the things that you shared with me, I think I can have a clinical diagnosis of what the situation is here, but I have to confirm two out of three, I guess, the measurements or standards of what they consider PCOS, which I didn't know she was referring at the time. But in her medical expertise, just based on what I was shared with her, I'm assuming how the conversation went, that that's what she was going towards, but she needed a clinical diagnosis. And I had to answer yes to two out of the three things. The three things was irregular periods, which we already knew that I had. The other thing was irregular facial hair or hair in in large quantities around your body. So like heavy mustache or growing hair on your chest or other body parts that just does not is normal for quote unquote a woman's DNA or makeup. And three, I want to say I cannot remember off the top of my head. Um and I'll have to share it in a chat when I come back. But after my next visit, I want to say it was a hormonal test, if I'm not mistaken. And basically, when I got the results back, because it was yes to those two out of the three, I was formally diagnosed with having an infertility condition. And so I can't speak for everyone, but again, my journey was that basically, if you wanted to conceive, you would need medical intervention to help you in your journey. And so what she said was, I can connect you or refer you to our infertility department. You can speak to someone there and start your journey. And for me, um, I was like, like with anything, overwhelmed with feelings and emotions, right? Because one, um, I had to first process it. And then two, because I was already in a relationship at the time, then having to explain this to my partner. And I don't want to say like I was fearful because he did make his intentions known up front that he did want kids and not having kids was a non-negotiable. But at the end of the day, it wasn't like, oh, I was fearful of sharing this with him for fear that, oh, the relationship may end or he would leave me. It was just that I even didn't have a chance to sit, understand, process what the news was. But because I was already in an active relationship, I had to then wrap two brains around it and understand like what would happen or what would that mean for me, right? And so that's when my unpacking journey began. One, doing research on what exactly PCOS is and what is actually going on in my body. Two, where what are the options when we talk about infertility? These medical intervention options that can help you on your journey. And so you already into this realm understanding that nothing you do is 100% certain, because even in all the medical interventions, they have percentages and every procedure has a different success rate, but none known that I am aware of, any of the current interventions give you a 100% outcome of being able to conceive. So you kind of like go on this journey, one, trying a number of various things, and two, just understanding that you can end up anywhere um, along this spectrum. Because I want to say, even though they don't classify this, but I really think infertility is a spectrum because through going through this process, I actually joined a infertility support group because, as I said early on or shared early on, this was something that was so foreign to me. And part of my ignorance, not that I think like, oh, as being a person of color that I'm exempt from things, it's just that in my experience, I had never met someone um who looked like me who made it known that they suffer with infertility. So the one thing that I do want to share, and me sharing my story and being vulnerable on tonight, is that what I'm not saying is that this disease don't impact us in the way that it does our other counterparts. What I am saying is that oftentimes I realize due to shame, due to lack of understanding, due to lack of having the financial ability sometimes of being able to have options that others may not have. We are not always public. And I think part of what my yes was to you is also raising awareness to the level where we break the silence, right? Even though it's uncomfortable, even though we may think that people may look at us different, men may look at us different, or may not even want to be in a relationship with us because they are aware that we have this condition. It's just important for us to know like what's going on with our bodies, and to have all the information that if you are choosing to go down this infertility road or journey with or without a partner, because you still can go through this journey without being in a relationship. So I don't want the takeaway to be is that, oh, I have to have identified a partner or be in a relationship for X amount of time before I can start my journey. Because one of the things of being a part of a support group, I've met so many people in this journey, and the stories, the varying degrees of what people has been through or are still going through will blow your mind. I have been fortunate that in the almost 2 year time period of going through this journey, I was able to conceive. And I give all honor and praise to God because I have been surrounded by folks and heard their stories. You know, I've met people from like who may share like my similar timeline, like, you know, after a year to 5 years of trying, you know, they was able to conceive. But there are women who's living with such realities that they've been on this fertility journey 10, 15, 20 years. I met a woman who she was fortunate to know early on, it started her fertility journey at like 21, 22. And she was at 42, still trying, still believing God that she will one day conceive. Me, like I said, when I found out about my own condition, um, from medical standards, and when we're talking about the realm of childbearing age, I still was considered late because finding out at 34 and a half years of age, you know, 35, you're already considered a quote unquote geriatric pregnancy or things of that nature. So, um, nonetheless, and for me, one of my biggest motivating factors at the time, even though, yes, I was or had already planned with my partner that we did want to bring a child into this world, during that space, my grandmother's health also began to fail. And even though when I talked about previously, like me sitting with it and my processing it, that was another thing that sped up my timeline in terms of the route I want to take, the options I want to do, what am I willing to subject myself to? Because I had this other factor that I was trying to meet, which is that while my grandmother, the one who raised me since I was 7, kind of molded me into the woman I am today, and because I knew that I desired a motherhood, parenthood, and possibly the option to adopt after I had a biological child of my own, just because I was a product of adoption as well, even though that was my paternal grandmother. Um, I wanted her to see me in motherhood, parenthood form. And so one of the things where I was willing to try um, and face this infertility journey head on was with the hopes that, one, I would have a successful story while she's on this side of heaven. Um, Unfortunately, that did not happen, as in 2 weeks we will be celebrating the first anniversary of her death since I lost her on July 4th of 2023. Um, However, she was very much alive when I at least started this process and started the journey, and was one of my motivating factors to continue the journey. When I did lost her, I did have a brief period of asking myself, is it all worth it? Or should I stop? Um, Maybe give up, maybe accept my reality. Um, and I went into a slight depression, I want to say, for maybe about a month after her death. And something came over me, and me just sending my doctor a message to say, doc, I'm not sure if I want to continue in this infertility process, but let's just say if I was to continue, what would be my next steps? What would I have to do? Would I have to endure certain rounds or things of that nature? And what she said was, well, we can just do a test and see where your hormones are at. And based on if everything looked good, we can schedule you for an implantation session. And so what I didn't share early on, I had did 2 rounds of IUI and 2 rounds of IVF.
What's
And on
IUI?
my
What's
second,
IVF?
so it's um girl, I gotta so IUI, let me explain the process because I can't remember these long names off the top of my head. So
I'll tell you
IUI
that.
is the process of which um they take your partner's sperm or whoever's the sperm donor, right? Um, so he obviously, ejaculates or whatever, and you have to give the sperm to the medical professionals. The medical professionals then take the sperm and do a tube, enter his sperm into the woman via catheter. And so basically, still like a similar normal process, it's up to the sperm to find its way to the egg in order for conception to take place. The difference between IUI and IVF is both. I went through, and you can do this however many times your situation, but during my infertility journey, I did have one egg retrieval. In that egg retrieval, they were able to retrieve what they call as 18 follicles, which is the beginning process of an embryo. And so what they do is they wait the first 7 days to see if those follicles, what they refer to as mature. And if they mature and makes it to the scientific term of blastocyst stage, which means that they took your egg, and this can be done either fresh, meaning they just took it out of you, or in my process, sometimes your doctor will recommend that you do it frozen for better chances. So for me, when I had my egg retrieval, um, they put the sperm together right away, and then it went through the blasphemy stage, and then they freezed it, and then I came back in a future date to have implementation. Some women could have all of those things done in the same day, where they take the egg, and then they put the sperm and the egg together, and then you don't go through a freeze process. But for me, my embryos was frozen, and I did come back at a future date for implementation. So one is just that them putting the sperm in you, and the sperm still finding its way to the egg for hopeful that it will fertilize and the egg will implant. But IVF is when both processes are external, I mean they retrieve the egg from the woman and they retrieve the sperm from the man or the partner. And then in a lab, they're bringing the woman's egg and sperm together. And when that happens together, you wait the 7 day process to see if that fertilization will mature into a blastocyst, which is the final stage of an actual embryo. And then based on that, you can choose to have a transfer immediately, or you can freeze it and then come back for a transfer later on. So the connection here, what I was saying, by the time when I lost my grandmother, the previous year, or I should say a couple of months ahead of that, I already had an egg retrieval where they took out 18. Only, I want to say 8 made it to the blastocyst stage. And then, so I was able to freeze 8 eggs. And then the first time I did IVF, or when they did the implementation, it was not successful. Or I should say, when you do when the process happened, they grade your eggs. So based on the grading of the eggs, they can know right away, like, hey, this is not a good egg. We might as well get rid of it. Or you can, keep it, but they are realistic in the terms of this may not be good quality, it may not, and the name of the game is to have the best outcome. So I think ultimately I ended up with 6 being good and 6 becoming frozen. And so that means on my journey, I could have either A, chosen to do, and which some women do, and if you have more time, and possibly that was something that I also considered, you could have another round of egg retrievals. Because if you think about, and one of the reasons why women do egg retrieval, and egg retrieval also happens in women that's not on an infertility journey. Sometimes women just want to say, you know what, I may want to have kids in the future, but let me freeze my eggs now, because when you freeze it at a younger age, even when you turn older or get older, your eggs is still the biological age of when they took the eggs from you. So that is a reason why some women who, whether infertility is at play or not, would freeze their eggs early on. And so for me, I thought about possibly doing another round of egg retrieval, which I have not done to date. However, at that particular time, the 6 embryos that was frozen, I did go through one round of IVF, which was not successful. And then I had 5 eggs. And then during the time, shortly after my grandmother's death, when I reached out to my doctor and say what the progress, or what would I need to do to get the process started again, she told me that it would just be a matter of my hormones look right. She can start me on the hormonal medications again, and it would be just as simple as scheduling the implementation date, since I already had frozen eggs. I mean, I should say, because there's a difference. You can freeze eggs and you can froze or freeze embryos, right? Eggs is just your eggs, and the embryos mean they already brought the embryo and the sperm together. And so I actually had frozen embryos versus eggs. And I think what was confirmation for me, or the reason why I was able to get past the the hump of trying to manage my grief and manage this process that is already overwhelming in and of itself, right? Because the truth of the matter is we don't talk about, like, some people may say, well, you choose this process, right? Because if you don't have to subject yourself to going through this if you want, like, to conceive, right? But IVF, there are things that you have to do, right? For me, it was, I have a fear of needles, overcoming, could I possibly successfully do this, being able to have to stick myself daily every night. And sometimes in the process, it was 2 shots in a day, one in the morning, one at night, right? Sometimes as a part of your medication regimen, it could also include pills, um patches. It's just a whole number of things that could be introduced in your life when you subject yourself to going through this journey. And most women who are committed or serious about this process, because most women that I've spoken to along my journey, because the desire to have a child of their own is so deep rooted, it's so such a big desire of them. One of the things or commonalities that we shared, and I say myself included, is that we were willing to do whatever it took to give ourselves the best outcome at conception as possible. And I think when they gave me the appointment of um, my next implantation, and it happened to be my grandmother's birthday, I felt like that was confirmation to tell me to not stop now, and that this time will be different. And God spoke to me through that date. And I initially didn't think it had any significance, but it was a thought that was this significant in what I was going through and a part of my grief. And so I just trust the process, and I trust God, and I trust that my grandmother, just like in life, even in her death, she was still petitioning on my behalf. She was still going to the throne, to God
Mm.
before, and still just saying, I may not be there with her, but grant my child the desires of her heart. And that date being my date, initially it was a probable date, but when it became a confirmed date, I decided to say yes. I wore her memorial shirt in it, because when you do IVF, you don't have to get fully unclothed, but you are unclothed from your waist down, and you put on the medical robe. And so I took her into the surgical procedure room, literally in spirit, but also on my body, with her memorial shirt. And I had the procedure on October 16th, 2023. And I stand here before you, currently 9.5 months pregnant, about to give birth in 2 weeks, with an estimated due date, which also, the divinity in that, my due date ended up being my grandmother's death date, which is July 3rd. So my due date is July 3rd, but because my stubborn child is breech, I have been
Oh.
scheduled to have a C-section. And so I will be going in a little earlier to have her via C-section. And it's a girl. So also grandma sent me a girl with God's help.
What were some of your ups and downs? Did you have ups and downs? Well, I guess you talked about them, but tell me, what did those days look like? How were you able to get through those days, that you, like, with your body going through what it went through, and even making the decision to go further into the process after losing grandma? What said, okay, I'm gonna go ahead and try it? Was that you just trying, and it just so happened that during that implantation on her birthday that was your confirmation?
So I guess the challenges prior to her death being a factor was just the normal stuff, right? What what we don't or never really put together or think about a lot is that ultimately our body operates on many systems, right? And one of the systems that are at play that allow, women's body to do what they need to do in terms of reproduction and men bodies to do what they need to do in terms of, sperm is that our endocrine system, right? So it's about your hormones. So even when we talk about men and women having infertility issues, what it really comes down to is some type of imbalance in the natural hormonal um, system that allows you to be balanced, right? So with PCOS, there's an imbalance of estrogen and progesterone, which we know those are two key hormones that are part of a woman's reproductive system and is a part of her ability to be able to ultimately conceive, because your body do produce certain levels from, even though they're always present, but when you get pregnant they go at an all-time high. And so your body's ability to be able to support the process, which makes it an infertility condition, is when you recognize, or the doctors recognize, that your hormonals are not what it needs to be to support a birth. And so for me, I guess with like anything, right, when we're talking about hormones, it means that, your feelings sometimes are intense, right? I can feel very, very low on some days. I can feel very, very high on some days. And I don't mean from like a depression standpoint, but just sometimes you just don't feel like doing, or sometimes you do feel like doing. Sometimes you're just in a state of, you just want to be, you may want to be around people, you don't want to be around people, right? But, at the end of the day, I guess for me, being that in retrospect, because it was confirmation that PCOS was always a part of me since the onset of my menstruation at age 12 or 13. I guess the hormonal imbalance became a natural part of my way of life, just never knowing that, hey, this thing in the background ultimately was impacting my hormonal response to people, places, and things because of the imbalance. So I think that it was normal, but maybe sometimes heightened, because the therapies that they give you in terms of the mix of medication is supposed to stabilize, quote unquote, your hormones, or bring it to what it needs to be. So I will say that the hormones piece of it is not really the biggest or the toughest part, because on some level, just without having, infertility, we have hormonal responses and reactions.
Yeah.
But I just think that the biggest change or the biggest adjustment in IVF, no matter what path you choose, it's the depending on your path or depending on your condition, right? What is your process, right? So I was fortunate that even though I had to have two procedures in addition to the egg retrieval and then the IUIs and the IVF, I also had to have two other processes. They was non-surgical, so I didn't need to get cut. But one being when they put film that they inject me, that outlines my whole reproductive system, and it basically tells them, hey, is my reproductive system working right in terms of, yes, we already know that this person has a condition, but we want to know, is there anything else that could be blocking or adding on to this infertility condition, right? So that could be, hey, is there any blockages in the fallopian tubes, right? Are there any issues, particularly in the the ovaries. So one of the procedures that I had was this type of ink film, which when inserted, it highlighted my whole reproductive system to basically confirm that, hey, there's no blockages in my fallopian tubes and that my ovaries look good. Because the whole point and name of the game, right, is to give you your best chances, even though, like I said, it's never 100% no matter what path you choose, but your best chances. And so most medical approaches is checking for everything, right? Because you could in this infertility journey, and that's why I say, some people can go through this process and have to accept the reality that no matter what they try, they would never be able to conceive. And some people would just be about the timing of when it happens. And so I just think that that's important. But the biggest part wasn't the hormonal. The challenges was just accepting all the procedures that come along with it. And again, I'm just sharing my personal journey, but I want to acknowledge, because some people do have rougher journeys than me. Their procedures may involve um a cutting procedure. I've spoken to women in my support group who had to have like through this process because they have endometriosis, which is like a inflamed uterus. They have to have procedures to control the in, endometriosis, because if I don't control that, then it's going to impact their ability to conceive. There are women who's in this journey that they have fibroids, and if you know anything about fibroids, that also becomes a factor in a woman's ability to be able to conceive or not. So sometimes they may have to have surgical procedures in between their IVF um medical process to say, hey, I may have to have fibroids removed first. And sometimes that journey is tough for women because as we know, fibroids come in all different sizes. My sister suffer from fibroids, and it's a very painful thing for her. So I wanted a takeaway that I want to be heard through my story is that infertility looks different for all of us, and no one's journey is the same, even though we may have or taken similar options, whether it's IUI, whether it's IVF, whether it's a hormonal medical concoction, because usually those are the three stages of how you address fertility. They first start you on the minimum one, which they try to see that, hey, if through a combination of medicines that you take orally, can we balance your hormones that you conceive and get pregnant? And then after, if the medication therapies don't work, then that's when or you can choose to do IUI. And then if IUI certain rounds, then you can do IVF. Now, the other thing to highlight here is that even though these are the three ways, again, like I said, if women have other complications in it, whether it's other autoimmune disease, whether it's other, type of things that impact them, their journey could look different. But the other thing that I think, which is not spoken about and that impacts infertility a lot, is that a lot of women make choices based on their insurance. Oftentimes, insurance will only cover 3 rounds of IVF, hence why most times people will try often to do the medication therapy and the IUI more than the IVF, because once you tap into your IVF, the general consensus that I found out through being a part of my support group and talking and even having insurance of my own, IVF only covers your IVF benefit insurance will only cover up to 3 rounds. So if you're somebody that's very committed in this process and you exceed your IVF benefit, again, depending on your insurance and your place of employment or whatever it is, you could be in situations, and this is another thing that's not talked about, is that where you have to self-pay. And some people take out mortgages on their house, second mortgages, or some people, get into self-pay plans or get into debt because their desire to want to conceive, that they really do whatever it takes. I was fortunate that my insurance was sustainable. Yes, I had a lot of co-pays throughout the process, but infertility cost is a tax write-off. So I was able to ride those expenses off in my taxes. But I think it's worth mentioning because this is a situation that sometimes can bankrupt people if they are in situations where they've run out of insurance options depending on their employer and they've tried to self-pay and they still didn't get the results that they want. And so they just do, ultimately whatever it takes, whether it's money through gifts or donations to family. But sometimes that is it. And we've seen couples or just through the support group who they start this journey together and don't end it together just because the journey of IVF or infertility as a whole just takes such a weight that it breaks up families, it breaks up people. So it definitely requires a lot mentally, physically, emotionally, so you really have to prepare yourself for the journey. And sometimes, even in saying that, you can't really be prepared. But when I say be prepared, just know that these are the things that comes with it, along with this infertility journey. And for those who are able to, stay the ride, however it looks like, um, then there could be a reward. And for those that who are not able to conceive because there was people in this process who did get to a place where maybe it's not going to happen, and so their last resort or only option was to just get to a level of acceptance that they would not have biological children, and then adoption was the only option and to complete their family. But even that is not an easy process to get to. And even me, I remember sharing with my inner circle or sharing with people in the process. And sometimes, you have to be careful what you say and take on the advice of others because you really don't understand it anything. And this is what happens with a lot of conditions until you have to live it or experience it in a personal way, because sometimes people think people that are on this infertility journey is crazy. Like, why would you keep spending money, or why would you do this, or why would you do that? Or they want you to be at a place that you're not. Like, oh, it's not the end of the world, just go and adopt. And they don't understand that it takes a process to get there. Like, it's nothing wrong with having a desire to want to have your own biological children, and don't ever make someone make you feel bad because that is your desire. And even if, yes, adoption becomes a part of your story, you have to get there on your own. Nobody can force you or make you get there, because those was some of the options that was thrown out to me, or I was made to feel like, oh, get over yourself. It's not the end of the world. There's people out there with other worse things or other worse conditions. Don't ever let somebody make you feel bad, because what is your reality? What is your condition? It is just as important.
Your options were your options of the route you took, they were already
I
planned
tried all
off?
three. I tried all three. So the
Okay, they were
medication
they were they
therapy,
were put they were put out for you, or you
yes,
chose them?
yes. So they were laid out for me. And they tell you, because they have to tell you the percent rates for all of them. And so I was told these options, and they did make clear that IVF was the most, had the highest success rate. Um, but again, because of the insurance limitations, most people don't jump to that route if they can avoid it. So I went through the standard process of seeing, hey, do the medication therapies work? Then IUI, I did 2 rounds of IUI. And then I was actually going to try another round, but at the time, because my grandmother's health journey was impacting this and her health became a little worse, I just decided to just go to IVF immediately after 2 tries of IUI. And I did 2 rounds and got pregnant on the second round. And again, for me, at least with my insurance or my job, because I work for a New York City agency, I get to choose healthcare providers every year. So I had the option of, and this was going to be my plan, and if I had to, that hey, if the second time wasn't successful and I went for the third round and it wasn't, when it came around for my annual health insurance change, I would have just changed it to another provider, because then if I changed to another provider, I would reset those three limitations all over again. So there are some things you can do to exhaust. But again, I want to recognize that that's not everybody's story, because not everybody can work for the government, or not everybody, have the option. So again, it's still, your journey is impacted by, unfortunately, your ability, if you're wealthy or considered, a certain class, and maybe you can fully finance um, the fertility journey, or you're someone like me who relies on health insurance, or then you're in neither one of those categories, and you just like are self-paying on a payment plan. Reason why you can't choose the path, because remember how I spoke earlier, so many other things could come into play, right? When they lay out your options, they may not necessarily know that you would have like an inflamed uterus, or they may not know that you may have fibroids or other things like that's impacted because you have an existing autoimmune disease, right? So I think your path is never chosen. I think you have more say in the options. And when I say options, everyone essentially have the same options. Is about what type of outcome you get with those options, right? Because I could have chosen to say, hey, I don't want to do the medication therapy. I don't want to do IUI. I wanted to go straight to IVF. And that could have definitely been my option. I just chose to start out with the other ones because, again, when you're diagnosed with an infertility condition, you don't know how good or bad it is. And so it's not until you've gone through the process to realize, hey, what do your individualized situation takes?
And does it have to be, okay, do IVF, IUI, it has to be in a certain way, or can it be?
You don't. That's what I was saying. I could have
Okay.
chosen to not do the other two and went straight. I'm just telling you that those are the three standard options that you typically have um, when we talk about medical interventions for the process of trying to conceive.
So they can be, so you can do IVF, that doesn't work, IUI, then do the medication therapy, or you can do
Yeah,
the
but
medication therapy.
most people won't start with the
With
most effective and go down to the least effective,
Yeah.
because the idea is that if the most effective is not working, the least effective may not have a chance. So it's usually in the reverse order.
Mhm.
Um,
It
and
can be in
so
any,
yeah.
or it can be done, the therapies or the ways to conceive can be done in any order you want,
Hmm.
any any way
So if
that.
you never wanted to do the medication therapy and wanted to just try IUI and then go IVF, yes, that's your option. Or if you just don't want to try none of those two and just want to go through giving yourself the best outcome. But like I said, I just shared that because this is sometimes what influence what process or journey people take. It's about the financial aspect, which is a big issue with infertility, right? Because again, we're talking about something, which is the case with most diseases, right? We didn't choose the condition, the illness, the disease chose us.
Yeah.
And so it sometimes can look at from a medical standpoint unfairness that because I have a condition, I'm now limited to the type or level of health resources that I can get.
Would you change this process? Would you, if you could live in somebody else's life, say, I don't want to have this life of infertility. Would you change it? Would you
I think on some level with any condition, I mean, if people had the option to not live it, I think we would choose not to have to do it. And not because, again, it's not about, oh, you're less than of a person because you have this condition. It's just that I think the natural human instinct is that to not add struggle or all these other things if it was an option to not have it. You know what I'm saying? Like, again, we don't choose the condition or the disease. Typically, they choose us. So I think on some level, if all of us had an option about like the cards we was dealt to choose something else, on some level we would, right? If it could be easier, or if we didn't have to deal with the financial or the emotional toll, I think we would choose different, right? But do I like, have regrets on the decisions I made. Like no, right? I was presented with a situation that I didn't ask or didn't choose to be. I tried to get, as much information as I could to make informed choices about seeing if I could conceive. And it just so happened that it worked out for me in a 2-year time period.
What has been the most rewarding aspect of this journey?
I mean, I think if you ask anybody that's been on any type of fertility journey, is obviously when it works, right? That's the reward, right? We go through this, we subject ourselves through these therapies, through countless doctor visits. There was weeks when I literally had to report to a clinical space every day before going to work, because with fertility everything is about timing and they have to get it right for the best chances. So in this journey we have something called morning monitoring, and morning monitoring is when you get blood work and you get an ultrasound and you have a doctor that analyzes that, and based on that analyzation it'll tell you if your body is ready for the next step and whatever your journey is, right? So if my hormones was at the right level, I can then probably move to have an implementation. Or if my hormones was right at the right level, this is the optimal time to have an egg retrieval because I may have the most eggs during that time, right? So hormones is looked at a lot during this journey, and it takes a lot of monitoring. And even though they call it monitoring, there's a copayment attached to that too. So there are sometimes literally in a month, I probably have been or seen a doctor literally 3 weeks out of the 4 weeks in the month every day. And the thing about IVF, because it goes, or I should say infertility, excuse me, because it goes by hormonal responses, most IVF treatments and clinics and hospitals operate 24 hours. Well, I should say 24 hours a day, but 7 days a week. So these was appointments that didn't just happen Monday through Friday. There was times when I went to the doctor before church or still trying to make it to church. There was times where I had to plan it into my Saturday. Because the doctors can't tell you when your body will have these type of responses. So monitoring happened literally 7 days a week for a woman who is going through the infertility journey.
There's no way to know that that a woman may have, or a man may have an issue until they bring it to their doctor's attention that I've been trying and nothing has happened.
So, right. We never can speak on 100% certainty about anything, right? But I'm speaking based on my experience, right? Because to be told by a doctor where technically PCOS is something at the onset of your menstruation when you're 12 or 13, or whenever you have it, right? Because for women, they can have their period at different ages, right? And so technically, from, a limited standpoint or viewpoint, you would say, well, you could have found this out as soon as you started, going to OBGYN, or how we say have our annual pap smears, which usually is recommended either one by a certain age, or two, when you disclose that you have become sexually active, right? So for me, my experience have been is that if you're not, if you don't disclose to your doctor that you are planning to conceive, planning to start a family, they will not look for infertility markers. Unless you just happen to have, let's just say another condition or another circumstance or situation that they might be testing for or looking for. And your infertility condition may become known through another journey or process, but it's not something that I'm finding out in your experience of having your annual exams. No, they're not automatically searching for whether a woman has an infertility condition or not. So that's been my experience, that until you close to your healthcare professional that you are trying to conceive or trying to start a family, then there are things that they would start to look at.
What
And it even requires also a certain amount of time period, because that was also the difference, right? So yes, you just saying to your healthcare provider, hey, me and my partner, or I'm looking to have or start a family, because you could do this process. Like I said, not necessarily with a partner, you may go through this process already knowing that you want to use a sperm donor or a sperm bank. So that's definitely your options as it relates to infertility as well. So I don't want to go into this thinking like, oh, you have to have a partner. I can't speak quote unquote on the issues for men, um, infertility and the options that they have when it's been identified that it's the man with the issue versus the woman. Because I would think that it's obviously different things for different genders. But I can only speak to, what's been my condition of PCOS, and know that's not the only infertility, I guess, conditions or conditions that exist that could lead to infertility. Again, that's just my personal journey. So that's why when we initially started off this conversation, I said to you up front that infertility is a very general term, because infertility could also meet you at, hey, you had another condition or another situation. And for instance, cancer. If somebody with cancer go through, severe rounds of radiation or that kind of treatment, that can make them infertile. So then their process looks different because they didn't necessarily had something that their OBGYN had to identify for them. It's just happened to be a reason or a result of an unrelated disease or journey, right? So I think, I was thinking about how can I put it in context, but I think just the example that I use with cancer shows you that, infertility can also happen in that way and not necessarily the way that it impacted me, that I had a condition that's known to cause infertility. I could have had an unrelated condition and going through that healing process of trying to address that. Infertility was a tragedy of that process.
do you know if necessarily if anyone else with PCOS necessarily has an infertility, or if you have PCOS, you're going to have an infertility issue?
So yes, so PCOS is known to cause infertility issues, or when you are classified as having PCOS, generally you are classified as having an infertility condition. But I just wanted to say that, that's not the only way that you can arrive as being classified as having an infertility issue.
What have you learned about Shaqwan in this journey?
What I've learned is definitely humility, and humility in the way that as human beings, we sometimes operate in a space that things are always going to work out or happen in this natural realm of things, of how things are supposed to be. And when you are fortunate enough, like for me, the most complications I've ever had in my life was asthma, which I grew out of. And then outside of that, I just struggled with, obesity for all my life. And, when you compare that to other things in the grand scheme of things, people may say, well, hey, you ain't really never had no issues or problems. And even if we talk about weight and obesity, that's a whole nother thing in it of itself, because you do suffer sometimes, and there are things that could arise from that, but that's a separate issue for another day. But I said that to say, like, I ain't never break a bone in my body. I ain't never had a reason to be subject to medical professionals outside of my standard annual checkups, right? And I thank God for that. I don't say it from a place of arrogance. but that has always been the extent of my medical encounters. It was always about my annual physicals, my checkups, dentists. Every now and then when I may need a specialty referral, that was it. So for me, this was my first quote unquote medical crisis that I had to manage and go through. Um, and I mean, some people would say by choice because, I didn't have to. But for me, it wasn't a choice if I wanted to give myself the opportunity to conceive and bring a child into this world biologically.
You use the word crises. Are you using that loosely for lack of a better term, or was it a crisis for you? Did it feel like a crisis for you?
What you mean?
Did it feel like this is so hard? Like, how am I gonna get through
You got
this?
to remind me because I don't even know the statement or the what did I say? How did I use it?
You said, um, you said this health crisis. You said going through this health crisis.
Because I was saying that it's personal to you and I think I used that because, like I said earlier, even though you know that you've been diagnosed with this condition, other people, for ignorance and lack of a better term, may not see it as a issue, quote unquote, right? Because some people may say that she chose to subject herself to this infertility process, right? She could have just decided to not want to have kids.
And why didn't you?
Because I guess for me, um, like I said, this is not to knock anyone who has made the decision to not have kids, or if they know that that was their desire for a long time, like they don't want to have kids, have accepted it, they are content with their decision and all those things. That was never my story. When I looked at Shaqwan in the future, when I looked at my goals, whether they be professional or personal, I always saw myself as eventually, achieving some level of the American dream, which is to, be successful, however success looks like to you, whether it's through business, through a job or whatever, and having, a husband, a lifelong partner, and us having a family together. So for me, having kids was always a part of my future. And so I never looked at myself as not being a mom at some point. I just looked at it as I will have children when it's the best time for me in all aspects, financially, emotionally, the best version of myself, physically, the best version of myself.
What are you looking most forward to in your motherhood journey?
Um, I think it's something special about um being a co-creator with the Father, and that God, as much as having kids or one of, your directives, be fruitful and multiply, as much as that is quote unquote a part of the natural order of things, I think it's still some humility in that our God, and I know people may feel differently because you don't believe in God or you're atheist or whatever that is, but I give praises and honor that I believe in a higher power. So I think it's humility in that, God allowing me to be a co-creator with him in terms of creating life, right? And on top of that, um, being able to say that you are directly responsible for the life trajectory of another human being. I do not take that lightly, right? I know parenthood, motherhood will come with its own set of, challenges, rewards, and even disappointments if we're being real, right? But saying that you had a direct impact on someone's life in such a way that I don't think you get to experience it without having being parenthood, whether it's a traditional method of if you biologically have a child, or even if you went through an adoption process, is the same thing, right? You are directly responsible. You are committed to this lifelong journey of developing a little human, a tiny human, into an adult, right? So my hope or the reward is that saying that I contributed to the world in a way that I gave a piece of myself in hopes that my child, the person who I co-created with God, will now go forth in this world to do some good, to interject some good. I think that is something very special. And so I do not take the opportunity of motherhood or parenthood lightly, you know. And even with all of that, I still choose it because again, I think it's something so special about ownership of being responsible for another human being in such a way from birth to adulthood, right? Because we all had to go through that journey, right? We are here because we were once an egg, an embryo, a baby, different, you know, time periods of adolescence, a young adult to an adult. So if we are here because of that process, I think it's so special to experience that process through seeing that process through you conceiving and having a child of your own in however form that it looks like, because I don't want to limit it to just biological or genetics, DNA, however you want to spin it.
Mhm. Um, what do you hope people get from watching this episode?
Um, I guess there are a few things, right? One, um, be grateful, right? Be grateful of your life, whatever cards you dealt with. And I know when people hear that, they may say, well, what is this lady talking about? Um, I think that we all can approach this life that regardless of whatever we're dealt with, right? And this is one of the ways that I keep myself humble is that someone is always experiencing something worse, perhaps the same, or something not as bad. But whatever that is, we're all going through something and we're just trying to live and manage with whatever our something is. And so I think being able to still find gratitude, even when these things exist, it helps us overall still have a better quality of life, right? Because with gratitude, it helps you get to one of the parts of stages of any type of processing, which we know as the level of acceptance, right? If there was not a level of acceptance to my condition, I would have never had the fortitude, the tenacity, everything that it took to prepare me and to address this journey head on, right? I had to accept that that was my reality and still count my blessings despite that being my reality. And the other thing that I want to be a takeaway from this is that, you know, when you know better, you do better, right? And sometimes because of lack of knowledge, which we refer to as ignorance, we form different belief systems and things of that nature. So I just want to encourage someone that whatever your issue is, right, whether it be infertility or not, one, find the courage to talk about it. And talk about it in a public way, because you never know how it'll help you or impact someone else's life or journey, right? Through you talking, there may be resources or knowledge that you get that you didn't even know existed for your particular condition. Through you talking, you may have saved someone's life, because where you have mastered dealing with this same situation may have someone with suicidal thoughts or ready to take their life because they don't know how to cope or accept this as their reality. So I say talk, not because you want folks in your business. And I get it, don't get me wrong. Sometimes talking, we think about how people are going to look at us, if they're going to look at us less than, if they're going to look at us like something wrong with us, or what do we did to deserve this. And so I get it. There's always a hesitation in our vulnerability and being able to share publicly about the issues that impact us. But even with all of that, I just believe that we do have a responsibility to share, right? Because you want to be a part of the solution, not the problem. And we can only be a part of the solution if we have tough conversations.
Is there anything that I didn't ask that you would like to say that my questions did not provoke you to say?
I would just say that, again, this journey or any other journey that you're facing, um, it is only yours. Nobody can tell you what to feel, how to feel, um, and for how long to feel it. But what I will say is to make sure you're doing what you need for you to weather the journey. However, your support looks like, tap into that because it's going to be needed, right? And even though I was in a place where most people didn't understand where I was going through, so initially I didn't talk about it, right? This was one of the first times ever joining a support group for anything. But sometimes you realize that you're able to easily disclose information to strangers than people that know you. And so sometimes that has to be your approach, to talk to strangers before you find the courage and is willing to speak to people that do know and love you, and not because you're quote unquote hiding things from them, but sometimes people just really don't understand. Sometimes people just really don't know what it is that you just said to them. And so I feel like sometimes it is your responsibility to, yes, sit with it, get as much information as you know. So when you do share, you're not just sharing half of the story. You're able to share what the it is, able to share your options, and then also what are you going to do with those options? Because then that way your support is curtailed to what you are preparing for your journey. And just like you have equipped yourself with the information required, your loved ones or those that are going to be a part by choice, a part of your support system, can know the best way of how to support you.
Well, I thank you, Shaqwan, for doing this so much. I'm glad I talked you into doing it, because at first you didn't want to do it. But I thank you that you decided to do it. You decided to share your story. I'm a big advocate of sharing your story, so I'm glad you did. And it's always my prayer when I do these episodes that somebody, like you said, they are saved. They feel seen. They don't feel like they're by themselves. And that you feel empowered, that you did fit, that you decided to share your story, and that you don't stop sharing your story, and you not be ashamed of your story and afraid of your story, and that you would tell your Nigerian princess one day about this story and how she came into the world. And I am so happy for you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
And I love you.
Love you back.
And I can't wait to see you as a mother and how you rear this little princess in this world.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And also to encourage you to keep doing what you're doing and in the spaces that God has allowed you and giving you platforms to do this work, because it is important. And I know you also, have your own story and go through your own challenges, and even in figuring out, what you should be doing in your life. And so I also commend you and kudos to you, because despite your story, you are still putting yourself out there. You are still doing things in public spaces where most people with your situation will maybe try to hide. You don't hide, and you do make yourself um, available in spaces. And so I just want to say, keep doing the work that you do, because it's definitely much needed in and outside the kingdom.